Real quick, just give you a little bit of background. I am a full-time teacher. I've been for 15 years in Racine Unified School District at Horlick High School. Special ed teacher. I started doing self-contained, mainly 9th and 10th graders for like English classes and such. And then inclusion really started growing even more. So I started joining some of the team taught inclusion style classrooms with a focus in history and the English. About 5 years in, I decided to start a team. We're trying to find ways to work on freshman transition into high school. Joined a committee and we started a group of freshman cohort, or a freshman academy it became. And from there, we've been able to develop more hands-on transitional services for all students, not just special ed students, but all students, and work on the transitions from middle school to high school. All the teachers are, like, for instance, we have a cohort of teachers that work with the same students. So all those students, approximately 150 students, all have the same English teacher, math teacher, social studies teacher, science teacher, and then we have a freshman seminar teacher that teaches a lot of, the skills that special ed students are used to learning or being taught. But, unfortunately, a lot of the regular ed students don't get that, some of those trainings. So we're kind of incorporating a lot of those life skills and functioning skills for everybody in that freshman seminar class. And then they all have the same, within that group, there's probably about 15 to 20 special ed students, and they all have the same special ed teacher that will work with them inclusion and as a resource class that we have separately as an elective that they can take and get one-on-one time. I am that special ed teacher for one of the cohorts. And so my special ed students would have me in their classes for math, have me in their class for English, and they'd also have me for a separate resource. So that's kind of the history on that. Then a few years back, I decided to go back to school again, and this time for a doctorate. And I'm at UW-Milwaukee, educational psychology, and my focus is on looking at humor and the benefits of use of humor in the classroom. I'm kind of said in the bio a bit, but serendipitously found that the use of humor seemed to be a great shortcut for developing relationships with students, especially students, African-American students and special ed students. I didn't know why. I just kind of relied on being, appropriate with it and goofy with it and always not hurtful and positive. But for some reason it worked, and that kind of pushed me into where I am today. So, and then that brings us to our presentation. I'll talk a little bit about the history of humor in the way of talking about like academics, how it's been looked at in academics and research, and then kind of the future direction of the use of humor in classroom settings. That's where we'll end up. I don't know, it's about 25 minutes, give or take. And if you want, you can put questions in the chat. Or you have to put the chat in if your mic's not working. But if you want, you could put at any time questions in the chat. I'll probably answer them at the end, because that way I won't get mixed up going back and forth. But feel free to enter any questions in the chat as we go, or enter them in at the end, and I can answer any questions or concerns or comments or whatever. All right. So, like I said, welcome. My name is Chris Avorka, and I'm going to be discussing the dangers, but really more of a focus on the benefits of utilizing humor in the classroom. It may seem odd that I would be presenting on this during a transition conference, but like I was talking about before, my inspiration on this topic comes from 16 years of experience teaching special education classes in an urban school district. And it was during this time that I noticed an uncanny correlation between my personal use of humor and quicker building of relationships with those students. So I did not know it at the time, but the use of humor with students can be an extremely efficient tool for building students' academic skills, as well as assisting with social emotional development. Unfortunately, humor is not always appreciated in formal settings like in the schools. Throughout history, humor has been stigmatized as a negative trait, and the use of humor within formal settings, such as academic or vocational settings, use of it there has been routinely frowned upon. Thankfully, scientific research has begun to discount many of these negative stigmas and have been able to open up minds towards the belief and understanding that humor is valuable, be positive, It's a trait that definitely we're studying and more academic review. So psychology understands that humor exists due to a complicated balance between multiple variables, and those essential variables may differ slightly between which researchers are doing the research. But the bedrock and the focus of the research does focus on the measurable effects of humor, such as smiles, laughter, and then they supplement this with respondent self-reporting and surveys. Humor is a relative construct where if one laughs, then that's considered funny. But there's more to humor than just the joyous response. Humor has been defined as a response, but to some cognitive and perceptual mismatch. So formally stated as incongruence. So if you think about incongruence, for this definition that they've utilized, incongruence is when things don't match up. And humor is kind of that response to figuring out why they don't match up and making them match up in your mind. And I'll talk a little bit more about that on the next slide. But educational psychology focuses on this incongruity theory for its operational definition of humor's occurrence. And incongruity theory states that humor arises from situations where perceptual expectations are not met. They got to be within, playful, non-serious situations. So if these expectations aren't met, if you're expecting one thing and another thing happens, the result could be humor, but it's also got to be a playful, non-serious situation for the humor to occur. When expectations are not met in these situations, it'll evoke a response. And this response can either be felt as humor if the incongruence is resolved, or confusion if it isn't. So here's an example of confusion if incongruence is not met. So you have a setup for a joke as, why did it get so hot in the baseball stadium after the game? Well, I found another random punchline to put in here, but it doesn't make any sense if it's, well, it wanted to be a Smartie. You can kind of tell it sounds like it's a punchline to something, but it doesn't match up here. It doesn't make sense. If you tell somebody this as a joke and they don't know we're talking about humor and stuff like this, they're gonna think like you're just the least humorous person in the world. It's not gonna make sense to them, and they're going to be confused. So neither of these seem to show any relevance to each other, and they do not seem to make any sense. This will lead to confusion. But if the punchline or the follow-up makes sense to us, the incongruency between the two statements has been resolved, and we can perceive it as humor. Even if we do not see it as funny, okay? To be humor doesn't mean it has to necessarily be funny. We should still be able to recognize it as humor, or at least an attempt at humor. The idea of incongruency is rather abstract. So along the way, there has been some clarifications through models and theories to assist with the understanding of how humor does work. This does get a little technical, but it's super important. And I hope it's interesting enough, but there's just two main points we're going to talk about, two models, bi-association and then developmental theory. So in 1964, Arthur Koestler developed a model of incongruency theory focused on the cognitive processes involved with the resolution of incongruencies and how those processes relate to the production of humor. Koestler called this process bi-association and theorized that the cognitive processes that were associated with creativity were also evident when incongruency and humor were being observed. When the congruence for available matrices or perceptual schemas are farthest from original prompt, then these available matrices can result in humor basically becoming a punchline. I'm going to show this out a little bit more on the next slide and kind of what this looks like. But it's everybody has these ideas of their expectations. They have these schemas, these ideas in their mind of what should happen if something else happens. If it's raining outside, then people are probably going to have an umbrella. All right, that would be a schema that we would assume is just common. It's something that we would expect. It's a perceptual expectation. He also states that bi-association does apply to other cognitive activities like creativity and critical thinking due to both those processes using those multiple matrices again. Those are accessed when attempting to solve some sort of incongruence or problem or while creating something new. So just like you have to think of multiple different things at the same time trying to figure out humor, you've got to do the same thing when you're using creativity or if you're doing critical thinking. So there's all kind of the same processes. Remember, this doesn't happen, as drawn out and as lengthy as I'm going to go through and explain in a slide. This is stuff that's happening split second. You see something, your mind's already kind of figured out, is that normal? That's supposed to be like that, whatever. Same thing with problem solving. You might take that and stretch it out a little more, but you do have to think about all these different possible situations when you're problem solving. So problem solving and critical thinking, creativity and humor kind of seem to run on that same model or that same process, all right? So whether it be humor, creativity, or critical thinking, the point of resolution becomes that, and this is as Kessler states, that spontaneous flash of insight which connects the previously unconnected frames of reference and makes us experience reality at several planes at once. In other words, he's referring to that aha moment, okay? That aha. That's a direct link between the processes associated with humor, creativity, and critical thinking, and only emphasizes the importance that humor can have in classroom settings. It can help bring about those aha moments. So here's a visual representation of kind of what I just talked about, and just an example. So you have a perceived incongruence. There's something that is perceptually there that doesn't seem to fit, such as a child picks up a banana like it's a phone, okay? Picks up a banana like it's a phone, like it's gonna answer it. Now, our expected matrix, like we know that we don't use bananas as phones. So from there, we gotta solve, and remember, this is all happening split second. We don't like sit and think about this. It's all happening split second. So from there, we have to then somehow make sense of why that occurred. Now, the top one there shows the child's pretending to use a banana as a phone. All right, we get why they do that. They're trying to be funny. It's an attempt at humor. We've resolved that incongruency. We know why they did it, and it makes sense of why they did it. Humor could be the result, all right? But if we think that, well, maybe it's because the child was hungry and grabbed a banana to eat, well, why would they hold it up to the ear? And that would be confusing. That doesn't really resolve the incongruency there. So the result would then be confusion. But again, this happens split second. You're going through these multiple different things. There could be 100 of these different examples of these different matrices that you could be going through at any given split second in your mind till you get the one that makes sense to you. Those are just two little examples of ones that does occur with resolving for humor, and then when it doesn't really recur, it might leave you confused if that's the solution that you're focusing on. So developmental theory has also created models to further assist researchers with understanding humor through observation, interaction. Paul McGee compares the development of humor to Jean Piaget's work on child development. Like Piaget, McGee states that these stages must be worked through in sequential order, but they can overlap. Between birth and 2, though, children aren't amused by the incongruence associated with objects like toys, but will respond to incongruence related to familiar faces. So there's kind of this weird area of 0 to 2 where they're not really showing what we would consider humor development. It's more reactionary. It's not really cognitive. It's not really up here where they're able to kind of develop what's going on, and they don't have that experience or the perceptual basis to come up with these different matrices. So that 0 to 2 years old, it's kind of grayer where humor development's not obvious or measurable, and it's really not considered a stage. But from there, you can see that, and if you have children or you know children, you've ever been close with that, you can kind of see where some of these might, match up with how children act. According to McGee, the first observed stage of humor development begins around 2 years old, and that's when a child will start noticing incongruence between objects, like the laughing that occurs if they put a baseball hat on a tricycle. All right. Stage 2 occurs early on in year 3 also, or right after that, early on in year 3, and is based on incongruent labeling of objects and events. So this would be them pointing at a car and saying, oh, look, an airplane. And timed like here, 1 second. Ugh. So there's some humor. That was unexpected, perceptual. Timed lights. Anyways. So is that part of your matrix? Were you confused, or did you find that humorous? I don't know. We can talk about that after. There's another example. So stage 2, like I said, early on in year 3, and again, pointing at a car and say, look, an airplane, and then they start laughing. Now, okay, we're gonna be like, oh yeah, but to them that's humorous, right? So they're starting to show even more cognitive growth, more development when it comes to humor. Stage 3 also occurs around the age of 3 with a focus on conceptual incongruity and the violations associated with such, so conceptual incongruity. Now they're starting to think of concepts and ideas, and they're starting to realize when it doesn't match up with something else, it's incongruent. That would be like a polka dotted goldfish would be funny to them, or a goldfish that walks around and talks like on TV or something like a cartoon. That would be something that would be considered as conceptual violation. This is also the stage where children become infatuated with the use of nonsense words. And this is kind of that violations also that occur with this conceptual understanding of language. They understand that language has these concepts kind of. So when they mess with those concepts of language, that's humorous for them. Now, by 7 years old, or the beginning of Piaget's concrete operational stage, McGee stage 4 begins, and children begin to use multiple meanings and higher level organization to recognize humor. This is considered the last stage of humor development by McGee, but they do acknowledge that. I mean, we continue to develop humor or develop our sense of humor, style of humor, throughout our entire lifespan. But there's really no developmental milestones or anything to look at beyond this. So by 7 to 11 years old, in that area, the most individuals already have developed what we would consider a sense of humor that we would be able to acknowledge and work with as adults. So what does this have to do with classrooms and teaching? Well, when humor is used appropriately and it follows certain guidelines and expectations, humor has some real benefits for cognitive and socio-emotional growth in the students and as well in teachers too. So it becomes a win-win situation for classroom settings due to the fact that it can benefit both the students and the teachers. So humor has shown benefits related to increases in the retention of knowledge, but these become limited when applied to specific details like learning vocabulary or memorizing dates. Humor seems to have the greatest effect when it's applied towards broader sets of information that focus on comprehension instead of specific details. So you think about something like talking about World War II. If you're using humor in a lesson, and it might be hard to use humor in a lesson in World War II, but there's appropriate ways, I'm sure. If you were to do that, an example of what would work with and what it wouldn't work with, it would work with more conceptual, broader areas of knowledge, such as broad ideas of why did World War II start? Answers might be militarization, imperialization, populism. Things like that might be answers where they can kind of understand, that leads to it if that's shown some success when humor is used. It doesn't show as much success when you start talking about details. So if you're to say, use it with information like, I want you to name in order all the important leaders prior to World War II, people like Tojo and, Stalin and Hitler and Roosevelt. That doesn't show as much success when they measure that in research and studies. But even those positive effects seem less likely when humor is used within textbooks. So, especially when they're used for independent learning, it is kind of an interesting side note. This does not mean that humor in textbooks should be avoided, since humor does have other variables that contribute to learning success, such as increasing a level of focused attention or general appreciation and joy of humor. And there hasn't really been shown any negative effects of using it in textbooks. Another peripheral benefit of humor currently being studied relates to the direct relationship it has with student interest and focus. So humor and laughing are very important to adolescents especially, and they often feel that teachers should laugh more also while allowing their students to enjoy more of their own style of humor in class as well, as long as it's appropriate. These positive experiences reported by students pave the way for increased direct attention towards relevant concepts that are being taught in the class. It increases their attention. They don't mind paying attention as much, and because of that, just by proxy, they will retain more knowledge. And this increased attention often provides cognitive benefits to learning, such as retention of knowledge, but there's also benefits related to creativity and critical thinking, which is also most likely due to the fact that creativity and critical thinking are associated with bisociation that we talked about. They're all similar, they kind of run on the same model. And since they are both examples of divergent thinking, humor may be able to assist with the development and enhancement of divergent thinking and have the potential to increase student problem-solving skills, which would be awesome. I haven't seen many studies come out with that yet. That might be somewhere I go for my future doctoral studies, but that it seems like it kind of lines up where that could be a positive and that could be a benefit. So it's something to definitely watch for in the future in research. So socio-emotional growth has also shown to be positively affected by the use of humor in classrooms. The determination of successful uses of humor is often attributed to an individual's sense or style of humor. The research leans towards a belief that one sense of humor or humor style is not a solitary, isolated trait, but it's represented by a grouping of traits and abilities that can continuously develop over one's lifespan. One sense of humor or humor styles are measured based on correlations between sense of humor models and individuals' personality traits, skills, or behaviors. So just technically, I mean, that's a lot of technical aspects, but it's really just saying that, you know, they finally figured out, how do we measure humor? Well, we measure humor based on how those relate to other measurement tools that we know are successful in measuring individuals, like personality styles, extrovert, introvert, those kind of things. They've been able to combine those and figure out a way to effectively measure humor. The main use of measuring humor is to define 4 humor styles. And I'll talk about those 4 humor styles, and also when is humor positive, when can it be negative, when can it be helpful, when can it be hurtful. So that's why it's important to know what you're measuring. The 4 styles of humor that are generally agreed upon now are as follows. The first one's affiliative humor, and this is used with other people's benefits in mind. It's used to facilitate relationships, reduce group tensions, maybe represented with untargeted humor, like pointing out incongruities, joke telling, humorous exaggeration. Can also include nonverbal or external sources of humor. It's probably the most positive form, most successful form of humor, that if somebody utilizes this more so in their day-to-day operations. But another positive form is self-enhancing humor. And this takes place when one uses humor for their own needs, often to stay happy and positive. Self-enhancing humor utilizes the same taxonomy or descriptions as the affiliative humor, and has a strong correlation with positive forms of emotional management. So, you know, a strong self-enhancing humor sense of style or sense of humor can definitely show a relationship with other positive forms of emotional management. Now, aggressive humor is used to criticize or manipulate others. That's a form of humors that might include sarcasm, teasing, ridicule. They're are often considered these inappropriate humor styles to use, especially in, you know, vocational or academic settings. And the final humor style is self-depreciation, which is humor that is used at one's own expense to gain the attention or approval of others. This is often seen as like anecdotal stories that somebody might tell, relating an embarrassing situation that they've been in themselves. This used to be considered a negative style of humor, but more recent research has shown that when used with certain adolescents and certain groups in high school, it can actually level the playing field for what a student believes is like a hierarchy, like a authority and power thing. Like if a teacher actually breaks down and tells them an embarrassing story, that's appropriate again. A lot of times the students will accept that and say, oh, they're not that different. I can talk to them. So there's some research that says that might be very useful in certain school settings. Relationship building is another benefit associated with the use of humor in the classroom. Within educational psychology, this construct, and they call it immediacy. I don't know why they also have to change words on things. They could have just called it relationship building, teacher relate, but I guess they got to make a new word somehow. So it's immediacy. That's what they call teachers, the relationship that teachers build with their students. And it's used to describe the educator's ability to build rapport, relationships with the students. An instructor will need to build trust before the effect of humor is fully recognized, with the high level of immediacy, you know, a better relationship being the goal. So the instructor's use of appropriate and relevant humor within the classroom shows positive correlations with students' reported levels of immediacy and the responsiveness to the teacher. It has also been reported that teachers who utilize course-related humor within the classroom become associated with positive emotional experiences by the students and increases the positive affect felt towards them by their students. So the benefits of relationship building between instructor and student, or immediacy, provides instructors with another pathway that can be utilized to help students achieve this academic success by reinforcing the cognitive benefits related to the use of humor and learning through these positive interpersonal relationships. Now, more recent research suggests that the style of humor used during communication by instructors, or any environment allowed to focus on negative styles of humor, may be directly linked to a student's future level of victimization. But the use of positive humor has shown a correlation with decreases in students' reported school-related stressors, and also in reductions of burnout among teachers. Due to its ability to kind of serve as this coping mechanism, allows individuals to face adversities from a less threatening perspective, given that teaching is a high-stress profession. So yes, if used inappropriately, that's why it's very important to understand the research and train teachers as to how to use humor appropriately. If done negatively, it can really cause some damage, and I'm sure we would understand how. Positively, there's some great benefits to it. And for the teacher as well, like I said, it seems to reduce burnout in teachers if they can utilize it with students. It probably has something to do with the teacher being able to build relationships with students, which is very rewarding. I know for a fact, if I could build decent relationships with my students, I love my job that much more. So I'm guessing that somehow the use of humor to build these relationships would make me feel less burnt out, because I'm also rewarding myself with that positivity of having that relationship with students. So, whoa, what happened? All right. So where does this put us today? What is current research saying about the utilizing humor in the classroom? I like this cartoon. My wife always texts it to me every day when we start school up after long breaks or whatever. But that's what it feels like when we start. For any teachers or caregivers or whatever, sometimes when we have long breaks, we come back. You don't want to go back. They're going to they tease me. I mean, the kids can be really mean to build good relationships. That sounds funny coming from an adult, but funny you think it's a kid there, and all of a sudden then the gentleman there is like, no one said teaching would be easy, dear. So, cute cartoon to segue. So, future applications for educational psychology, a couple areas I've been looking at I think are interesting is the potential, albeit controversial, use of humor includes applications in ESL classrooms and with adolescent African-American students in urban high schools. The ESL, and sometimes just language students, have shown a quicker development of vocabulary and knowledge in classrooms that appropriately use verbal irony or sarcasm. This is probably due to humorous promotion of like the fluency and the social linguistic rules, and also an understanding of certain cultural values within a dominant society. You have to practice. You have to practice the language to understand sarcasm. And if you start getting it, you can use it to help kind of represent two different ideas at once. And it's shown some really effects at somehow, they haven't really broken down how, but they're showing effects, positive effects of using humor with individuals in ESL classes to help them kind of get through some of the harder parts of language, such as these linguistic rules and certain cultural values. They've shown really good particular use in the classrooms when there's like downtime also. So like setting up audio and visual equipment at the start of class or while waiting for, tardy students to arrive. Teacher can use that time to use more open-ended joking and take advantage of potential teachable moments, and use humor to practice language in a non-threatening, fun way. Like when you haven't officially started classes, sometimes the students will feel less intimidated. So if you joke a bit on the way in with them and utilize that time for teachable moments, then it could seem to have some great benefits. And I know I've done that a lot in classes as kids come in. That's the best time to do it because their guard's down. We haven't officially started. They can come back with a little joke back if it's appropriate, and it doesn't disrupt anything because you didn't start yet. So within urban schools, the use of sarcasm has been shown to promote positive relationships with students and increase student awareness of critical language awareness, and thinking instead of traditional or conditioned responses, which is kind of a common thing. We're used to students having this conditioned response, yes, 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 to whatever they're supposed to say. This can help open up and have them have some critical thinking skills. Again, a relationship between critical thinking, humor, creativity. Also, use of sarcasm or verbal irony has shown positive effects in the classroom when used as a tool to remind students about on-task behavior or to manage inappropriate behavior in the classroom. This allows the instructor to address the issue than actually like attack the person for doing something that might not be acceptable for that classroom norm. So this becomes a catalyst towards immediacy also and trust, since the instructor can address these classroom needs and expectations without necessarily singling out any specific student. Verbal irony has also been linked to increases in adolescent self-esteem due to its effect on the creation of microcommunities. So if you're using sarcasm or verbal irony in appropriate ways, it does create these microcommunities of trust. And these subgroups has consist of participants that unilaterally understand these attempts at humor and do help facilitate the belongingness among them. So the use of verbal irony could assist instructors in finding a way into certain adolescent in-groups, which could in turn assist with development of trust and immediacy between them beyond the levels already talked about. Another seemingly unconventional form of humor that is gaining attention is use of teasing or verbal jesting. I think that teasing is such a bad stigma, they've changed the name and started calling it verbal jesting, which is a humorous phrase itself. But this has long been considered an extremely negative form of humor when used in classroom setting. But there is some research that has shown when teasing takes on a more positive role during adolescence and is seen by teens as being a playful and pro-social interaction amongst themselves, they consider themselves as a benefit. Pro-social teasing was correlated with more positive responses in the person being targeted, whereas, of course, more antisocial teasing was correlated with more negative responses from the target. The act of hazing and put-down humor even showed a positive alliance with respondent opinions due to its creation and enforcement of shared norms. This helped develop a sense of community among the parties involved based off of shared experiences. So among these adolescents, teasing is used repeatedly to encourage, persuade, enforce, and acknowledge group norms that they feel within their group are important or representative of their microcosm. So this may provide some applicability in the classroom, especially regarding development and enforcement of classroom expectations. If a teacher can utilize that somehow, if we could figure a way to utilize that safely, proactively, that could definitely be a great tool for classroom management and to build immediacy between instructor and student. Now, of course, I want to put on a disclaimer. I wouldn't recommend running out and I would not recommend teasing. That is not what I'm saying. Or what I'm saying is it is definitely here to be studied. I've used it a lot with my students, but I've also been a very positive person with it. And I've done it. That was just naturally my personality. The teasing comes off wrong. It's more like pointing out differences or helping them make fun of themselves. And a lot of times doing it through yourself or your actions. So they like it. They feel like you're treating them, at least students I've worked with, they feel like if you do it again appropriately and positively, they feel like you're treating them like a colleague instead of a student. It's easier to get them to come with you and follow along. But I wouldn't necessarily recommend and tell new teachers to start that. That's something that I happen to just do as part of my personality. It worked, and then I honed it to be as positive with them as possible and make it work as much as I could for them. So that is an area of future research for sure. So considering all this, there's enough research, I believe, at least that points towards a positive use of humor within academic settings. This should be done cautiously and with a strict adherence to proven best practice. It may be a valuable tool for instructors, but cannot be seriously implemented without professional development and training to those teachers. Now, there really isn't much out there to provide that. I've looked, and maybe that's what I will end up doing, postdoctoral, but I haven't seen anywhere where you can call up people for professional development on this. At least I haven't found it yet. So hopefully a catalog of research associated with the use of humor in the classroom grows, with humor becoming another valuable tool for teachers to use in the classroom, possibly building student success in areas that were previously stagnant. I always look at this as a tool. People are like, well, what if people don't like humor or they don't think they're humorous? Everybody's humorous. You don't have to like humor, and you don't have to use it. Like, I like to treat this as another tool. Teachers have that toolbox, and they got different tools in there that work best for them and their personality. This could be another tool for certain teachers to utilize. So there's enough research to warrant a more aggressive push to encourage the use of humor in the classroom through instructor training, while treating humor as both an ability and a tool that can be utilized towards student success. So, thank you. I hope this was as interesting for you as it was for me. At this time, I want to open up for any questions, comments, concerns, any statements you have. Did I put everybody to sleep? There he is. Everybody there? Oh, I see people are there. Was it that informative that you guys just I've sealed it and you have nothing to ask? In the chat box, go ahead and put in any. I want to make sure things are working. Type a letter in the chat box and enter anything. Oh, thank you. All right. I'm like, oh, I hope I didn't just talk for the last, half hour and all of a sudden everybody like got kicked off or something. All right. Does anybody have any questions or concerns or comments or? All right. Well, I hope. There you go. There. Yep. It's one of those things where it was, accidentally figured out. I always thought it was something wrong with using humor because that's what it feels like, especially as a teacher. And then to figure out, it is a positive tool that's totally ignored. And then to start looking and finding out that there's research out there that actually proves it is a valuable tool. That was quite rewarding. And also scary because you realize that it is a tool, but man, there's no guidance. There's no professional learning. There's no professional development, even though it could be such a valuable tool. Also, we've all seen teachers that don't use it properly. And then probably a main reason why they don't use it properly is because I think they're using it for themselves. And I think that's one of the keys. When you're using humor for the students, that's a big difference. That's probably the first main key to focus on when you're talking about utilizing humor is, are you doing it for you or are you doing it for the students? If you're doing it for the students, it's really hard to get it wrong. And the other thing is I only focus on non-personal information. If we're going to joke with each other, I'm going to say, that's why you like to sharpen your pencil so long. You don't want to do the work. Something like that. But you have to build a relationship. You can't do that the first day of school either with them. But like non-threatening situations that are not personal is the best way to do it. So definitely. Appreciate the encouragement of using appropriate humor. This is something that I use in my practice. I feel it helps with establishing rapport, and some take out the nervousness. Yes, in initial meetings. Yes, definitely. It is valuable. It's valuable beyond the classroom too. A lot of people say, even some colleagues of mine say, "What do you tell people that say they're not humorous?" And I'm like, everybody's humorous. You know what humor is. You don't have to be a joke teller to be humorous. You just have to recognize what humor is. And I had a math teacher that I worked with years ago. He was a very dry sense of humor that I loved, but the students were not digging it. It wasn't their kind of thing, that Bob Newhart dry sense of humor. But he realized that. So he would find little cartoons and he would put them in his PowerPoint in the beginning, just kind of get things going or stuff like that. So he found ways to be humorous without having to be extremely humorous. So what do you do when people take a joke away it wasn't intended? Apologize. Apologize. I usually say, you know what, I'm so sorry. I did not mean that way. I was just trying to have some fun with you. And then I try to turn it back on myself somehow. That's usually when I'll use some stuff like if I said, I'd probably say something about, they always make fun of each other about their lights in here. One second. Let me turn the light on. All right. I don't know if you guys can actually see the video of me on there, if it's just the PowerPoint, but the lights keep going off because they're timed. Anyways, I said, the kids will make fun of their hairlines once in a while. After I build a relationship, I'll say something about their hairline, and then I figure out, well, that's a little too personal. You wouldn't think it, you wouldn't know, but that's that cultural difference that I'm ignorant on sometimes. So I've had to say stuff like, well, hey, look at my hairline, I'm bald. So I put it back on me, and then they laugh, and then they're okay. You got to be prepared to back up and suck it up and make fun of yourself sometimes. And if you do that, then it don't feel so bad. But I've never said anything that I think was so bad I was worried I would get talked to about it or anything like that. I've come close sometimes. I've really had to check my jokes, not because I was being mean or anything, but because, you got to put your teacher mask on or your teacher hat on when you come into school versus when you're hanging out with your other friends or family outside. So, yeah. Any other questions? Okay. Well, I mean, I'll stay on. If you have any questions, go ahead and put them in. Other than that, that's all I have for today. For this part, I hope you're enjoying the conference. It's a little weird online, but it would seem like it would be a lot weirder before I started teaching in it for the last, 11 months. So I guess it's kind of become the norm. But hopefully sooner or later we'll be able to see each other in person and do different things and get back to some sense of normality. Who knows? But yes, I appreciate you guys stopping in and listening. And if anything ever comes up, or you have any questions, or you think about it in the future, I'm assuming that my name has an email address, but I will send it. I will type it in here anyways. I'll stop sharing that so I can see what I'm doing. I'll type it in. Okay, so let's get saved. I don't know which one they use. I'll use the one for my school for now. Right. So if you think of anything or you have any questions or you are like, oh man, I know you said something about whatever, but whatever, just send me an email at any time and that's it. That's good. All right. Other than that, that's all I have. So I thank you and have a great rest of your conference. Thank you. Oh, he suggests how to teach appropriate humor to students who are very literal. Oh, you know what? I was going to mention that too. The autism spectrum, individuals with autism spectrum disorders, that part of it, I've known that they don't. It's really hard for them to understand sarcasm. That's a common thing. If we work with students, we know there's some research that I started reading that was interesting that said that they focused in their speech therapy on sarcasm, and they did see some growth, some change, some functional growth based on using sarcasm as a tool, working with students, autistic students with autism in those speech therapy sessions. But I only seen one article and I didn't see much more. And it was a newer article. So I don't know what they've done since there, but that was interesting. So, and then the sign language part, I don't know. that I've not heard anything regarding that. I know that when I watch, the interpreters are on a lot now, and I think it's extremely insightful to watch the sign language interpreters when you're watching press conference or whatever, because their facial expressions, and it blows my mind how much goes into that. So I would assume that it should be able to transition somehow, but that would be somebody who is a specialist in that. I don't know enough about DHH or any of the visual impairment, any of that that'd be very hard for me to address. No problem. All right. All right. Give you about a couple more seconds. If anybody's in here and wants to share anything other than that, I will shut it down so you don't have to keep staring at me. A little awkward, but thank you again. Questions were great. And I hope you guys have a awesome rest of your conference. How do I end this? Just leave? Bye.